The first title that came to me was Introverts Can, because I've been told so many times introverts can't do public speaking, introverts can't sell, introverts can't lead, introverts can't do all of these things. And I think, well, that's just rubbish. Actually, to my mind, the way we approach a lot of these things, introverts are the best at public speaking, the best at networking, the best at sales. And I think that's the big myth, that introverts can't do certain things. And often I think we're our own worst enemy in that way, thinking, oh, we feel a bit shy and nervous, therefore we can't network. But once we learn, as we talked about earlier, a few of the tools, a little bit of structure, a bit of preparation, we're amazing at these things.
Hello, and welcome to episode 93 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave me a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Melitta Campbell is a multi-award-winning business and mindset coach who uses her 3 decades of marketing and entrepreneurial experience to help women confidently build a business that gives them the income, impact, and lifestyle they deserve. She's also known for turning being an introvert into a quietly powerful advantage. And in her best-selling book, A Shy Girl's Guide to Networking, she shared her victory formula for success on your own terms. Melitta is also the host of the Driven Female Entrepreneur podcast, a show that helps women dream bigger and achieve more. Originally from the UK, she now lives in Switzerland and works with women all around the world. All right. Well, I'm very excited for my guest, Melitta. Melitta, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast.
It's great to be here today, David.
So, Melitta, we're going to talk a lot about your book, The Shy Girl's Guide to Networking. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about you and your story. At what point did you figure out that you were an introvert? And how did you embrace that to become successful in business, to become an author, a podcaster, and a lot of other things?
Yeah, it's been a long journey. And I think it was quite late in life that I realized I was an introvert. As a child, it was always, looking back, it's quite funny. I'd love to go back and observe myself as a child, because part of me was really, really shy. And, walking into school, I had anxiety and I hated going into the schoolyard because you never knew if there was going to be anyone around that you knew, and would you just be left on your own or whatever. And that was, I really hated those moments. But in the classroom, I remember being quite loud, and I was always picked to be the star of the show when it came to any plays we were putting on and things like that. So there was part of me that had that confidence and could speak up. But I think it was only when I was working and I was quite deep into my career that we had this Myers-Briggs personality test at one point, and I came out as INFJ, and I was like, oh, I'm an introvert. Okay, that's interesting. And then I was really like, well, that makes sense. So I think it was even after that I started to speak about it with other people and say, well, what does this mean? Because sometimes I'm shy, but sometimes I can do things. And then I realized bit by bit that it has got nothing to do with this being shy at all. It was more to do with how we get energy and how we conserve that, and our sort of personality preferences. So it was an interesting journey. But looking back, I saw that throughout my career, I had some really amazing mentors, mostly in the CEOs that I worked with, because I was a reflector and a deep thinker, and that ideas would be pushed around the boardroom, and suddenly towards the end of the meeting, they knew that I would pop up with something, and I'd collaborated all of these ideas and said, okay, well, what I'm hearing is this, but I kind of feel we're missing something here. So I think they really valued that skill. And so I wasn't consciously embracing that necessarily, but it was something that really helped me succeed, helped me get the support that I needed to to learn and grow and develop in my career. Uh, so so I don't no, I'm not sure it ever was a conscious thing, but just these little insights and realizations that you can build on along the way. And then you realize actually when people when I hear people talking about introverts as a bad thing, or well, they can't do all of these things, you think, well, that's a load of rubbish. It's not true at all. And then my kind of inner like warrior comes out and wants to change things and speak up. And so I think that's part of the reason that I started public speaking as well, was just to prove to people that, introverts can do whatever they want to do. There's nothing stopping us back. So long answer to a short question.
Yeah, and that's definitely the Myers-Briggs was a big part of for me too, just realizing, oh, this is very natural for me, but there's great gifts. And that's amazing that you got recognized in work for being able to think and process ideas, and they're waiting to see what you had to say about something. You're not talking nonstop during the meeting, but you're reflecting and putting things together and noticing things that could be better or are missing. That's amazing. And that's something that we have to remember is our way could be the best way for us, and we can use our strengths. And that's awesome that that got recognized in your workplaces.
Yeah, maybe I was just really lucky with the people that I worked with. But even when I worked in extremely large companies, some of the largest companies in the UK, I saw that pattern happening again. The extroverts would speak up and put all of these ideas out there, which was great. But I'm kind of filtering them and then coming up with some more thoughtful questions a little bit later into the meeting. And quite often some of the senior directors were like, I've got an idea. Are you free for a coffee? I was
Sure.
like, okay. And I think they liked that I didn't jump on anything too soon. We could really have these thinking partnerships almost. So yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. Feels like a little puzzle sometimes. Like, okay, well, these are all the pieces, but how can we make these come together in a way that's really practical, is going to make an impact for other people, and it's going to be fun. So yeah, and I guess that's kind of what I do now with my business coaching, but it's yeah, it's something that I've always enjoyed.
Yeah, it can be a little puzzle, and I can really relate to what you're saying. And that's a lot of what this show is about. Help get your strengths recognized for who you are. Your strengths aren't going to be the same. You're not going to work the same as somebody else, but you still have something brilliant to offer, and that's really amazing.
Yeah, and I think they hide from other people. So particularly extroverts have this assumption that you're quiet and shy and you can get discounted quite easily. But I think the worst is when we do that for ourselves. Like myself, I carried that shy girl label for so long and decided, oh, I'm shy, therefore I can't do these things. So it was, yeah, I think we can be our own worst enemy sometimes, which is why I particularly love this podcast, because you're really helping highlight the opposite for people. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about. It's like we have our own gifts, so it's about strengths. What are our strengths as an introvert, and what are our needs, and then some strategies for success. And that's what we're talking about today. So,
Yeah. And I
in
think
your
that's a key thing you just mentioned there, these strategies. But because I think, as you say, with introverts, we do like to be a little bit more prepared. We do like to have pre-thought to a certain extent. So having certain frameworks and strategies and things that we can use to assist us in that really do help us to be successful. But they also help us to be more predictable, more dependable, and more more certain that things are going to work out ultimately, or for other people to have that belief that when they entrust a project to us, that we will see it through to the end and make that happen because we have the frameworks. We just have to follow it through. We're not being spontaneous. We're not one day being like really all over it, the next day not at all, like some extroverts can be with the way that their energy is. So I think that's really another strength, but maybe something that I've started to recognize that supported how I've achieved things in my life.
Yeah, and it's absolutely we do like to think, we need to think, it's a gift of ours, but a lot of times we need to do it ahead of time. And you're not going to think of everything ahead of time. Like you were saying in that meeting, you're getting new ideas, but hopefully before the meeting there was an agenda and you were able to think about what the topics were, what you wanted to bring forward, the things you wanted to ask. And that's where our strengths are. Or you said you like to speak. I do too. I know that I can be a great public speaker, but I have to prepare differently than my extroverted friend might to it. And some of it will be spontaneous, but I have to have a good idea what I'm going to be talking about, really put a lot of thought into it for it to go well.
Yeah. And I think when you have that structure, so if you're networking, for example, and you know how you're going to introduce yourself, you know the stories that you can bring in, you've really planned out a lot of parts of the conversation, it then enables you to relax into that conversation and be more spontaneous because you're focusing in the right areas and then you can see where that discussion goes, but you always feel comfortable that in more or less whichever direction it's going to go in, that you have the tools to manage that. And I think that was a big thing for me because it was scary introducing myself at a networking event back in the day. But then the more scary part was like, but then what do I say? How do I keep that going? And there's always that awkward silence. And you're like, I'm just going to the bathroom. And then people think you have a problem because you're going all the time. Or the worst thing is that I'm just going to the bar. And then you realize, oh, do you want a drink? And they're like, yes. And then you have to go back.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah. But yeah, having these frameworks and structures and planning ahead and being almost like super prepared, for me at least, helps me to be more spontaneous as well and comfortable that, okay, whatever happens, I can handle it because confidence doesn't come from knowing you can do it. It comes from trusting yourself to figure things out if whatever happens. And I think having those frameworks and that preparation enables us to have that confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. So you wrote A Shy Girl's Guide to Networking. How did you decide to do that?
So I was asked, and I can't remember at what point I was asked to start speaking on this, but I got invited to a few different organizations to speak about how to network because I became known for having this network. And when I stood up and presented it, and I talked about how I overcame my shyness and how I feel I network in a different way, and what that means and what that looks like and what tools I use. People were always really surprised afterwards, like, oh, when I invited you to speak, I had no idea you're an introvert. I'm so sorry. Like, why are you saying, why are you saying sorry? I wouldn't have accepted it if I was terrified. And I just thought that was a really interesting response. But also I could recognize a lot of the introverts in the audience, and they were doing exactly what I used to do. You could see them hovering because they want to come and say hello, but then they're like, can I say hello? What happens next if I say hello? I don't know really what to do. So I would make a point of going to them and saying, hi, thanks for being here, and helping them through that. So that was really nice. But then I thought, well, one, knowing that introverts who feel shy, or anyone who feels shy, it's not necessarily introverts, find it painful to go to networking in the first place, then reading a book first would be more practical, perhaps. But also I wanted to be able to spread that message further. And I had the structure from the talk. I kind of had to fill in the gaps, add in the stories, flesh out my tools a little bit more. And I had this idea for a very long time, probably 5 years before I actually wrote it. And that was from my network. I just happened to network. Someone put me in touch with someone. So, oh, you should really meet this lady. We had a chat, and I told her just at the end of the conversation, I mentioned this book idea, and she's like, "Oh, well, I'm a book mentor as part of what I do. Let's have a chat about it. See if I can help you move forward." So she spoke to me. We met again, and she helped me just give me the kick up the backside really to get it out there. But then she switched and became a publisher. So I became her first author. So yes, it was very much, I had it all there, but I just needed that kind of nudge. The hardest part of the book though has been the marketing side of it, because you have to be everywhere and out there the whole time. And I didn't manage that process very well. So being an introvert, I was just exhausted very quickly from that. So I'm working on my second book at the minute, and I'm already thinking, okay, well, how can I market myself differently, and get that book out there? So, but the nice thing with the book is you don't, it's always there. So I can continually like do things to promote it as I go, and it's still going to work. So, but that was the hardest part, I think, of the book, was actually then like promoting it afterwards.
Yeah, with anything, we learn as we go, and the next book launch will be better. I know that's going to be the case for me too. I know there's a lot of things marketing my book that I would have done differently, and I'm working on my second as well. So we'll have to talk about our second books too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, one of the stories in your book, early on when you were trying to learn to be a better networker as an introvert, you went with a friend that was a polar opposite. What did you learn from that?
Yeah. So I'd always avoided networking when I lived in London, and then I moved to Switzerland where I didn't know anybody. And it became quite apparent when I was just sitting in my apartment on my own that I have to get out and meet people somehow. Otherwise, I'm just going to be here on my own the whole time. I won't have a career or friends or anything. So I had to get out and network. And there was a lady that I made friends with, and she would network for like before work, at lunchtime, after work, at the weekend. She loved it. Um, Typical expert. That's how she got her energy. So I asked her, I was like, can I kind of shadow you? Because I feel quite nervous when I network, and I notice it feels very natural and enjoyable for you. And she's like, yeah, I'd love for you to come. So the good part was she introduced me to people, so I didn't have to worry about that part. That was good. That was done for me. But then the rest of the time, I was just watching her, and it's like she would have a conversation in one circle while bending backwards and speaking to someone in another, waving at someone across the room. She had the whole room going at the same time. And it's like, there was just no way I could ever do that, energetically versus, I would feel very fake trying to do that as well. So it was very interesting, but it was, I think, the big lesson there for me, and perhaps it was the big nudge that made me find my own way and really investigate my own personality and what would work, was that realization that I could never do it her way. I have to find my own way to do this. So that was, and then that was followed up with I was invited to a leadership training event over a week. And one of the exercises we had to do was to self-coach around a problem we had. So I chose networking, and I came up with my victory formula. And then as soon as I put that into practice, it was really helping me create my own rules, really, of what works for me. Then everything changed really almost overnight, and things started to come together. I built my network very quickly. I started to actually enjoy it, and sign up for networking, wanting to go, not thinking, oh, I should do it. I actually wanted to go to these things. So that was the big thing. But yeah, it was that realization that I have to do it my way that prompted me to move forward.
Yeah, I had a really similar experience with a friend that was an extrovert and sounds a lot like your friend. And that was one of my big epiphanies, just like you're describing, that this isn't my way. This is never going to be my way. It's not natural. It's very draining. It's not effective. And it's a brilliant gift that she has in her way to network, but it's not my gift. But I do have my own gifts. And just like you're saying, I can succeed on my terms. That was a huge epiphany for me. And I didn't want to network like her. That wasn't going to be my goal. I'm going to want to not bounce around, but get to know people on a deeper level. That was just a big epiphany for me that my gifts were mine, like you're saying. So you mentioned your victory formula. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So it's a, what is it, a mnemonic? Can't say the word. Where each letter stands for
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
So the V is all about having a vision and knowing your values. And that was my start point. Is like, well, how do I want to show up in the world? What do I want to stand for? What do I mean? And why am I even bothering to do this? So that was really my start point. And that was huge, because suddenly it helped me realize, well, I didn't want to be like this other lady that was just flitting around the place. As you said, I want to meet people and know who these people are. I want to understand them and see, well, how do they fit in my network? How can I be of value to them? And think differently about it. And so just knowing how I wanted to show up enabled me to have more confidence and reminded me to do that. To and I condensed it down to just 3 words. So I think it was open, serving, and bold, because I wanted to remind myself, be a bit bolder. But just reminding myself of those 3 words every time I went into a conversation or moved into a circle really helped me to shift my focus. Before, I think I was making it all about me. Oh gosh, I'm going to be center stage. But understanding that, no, I wanted to be open and encouraging and serve other people, took the pressure off as well. And then the I is intentional. So it was like taking that vision and then deciding, yeah, that's my vision, but I am committed to taking steps to make this happen, because you can't just think these things. You have to actually back that up with some action as well. The C is the courage. So having this courage to build my confidence, because the confidence is what comes afterwards. You need the courage first to take that step, and then the confidence is what you take away with you bit by bit every time you do something brave. And then the rest of the formula, it's all about creating my own rules of engagement and allowing myself, giving myself permission to, if I go to an event and I just have one conversation and I feel that's enough, I'm done, I don't have anything else to give, because sometimes at the end of a long day, you don't have much to give. You don't want to stay out and network for hours. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But if that was the situation, that's okay. I could have just one conversation and leave, and that's okay. Or I could leave, and very often these events are in a hotel lobby, or a hotel, so you can go into the lobby and just chill out for a bit, like recharge your batteries, go for a little walk, come back in. You don't have to be there the whole time, and just go with whatever felt good for me. And then the very last letter, of course, the Y, is like, you've got this, just to remind myself, just go for it.
Yeah, that's great. I especially like the why, just to remind yourself you got this. That sounds great. And it's just the way you're doing things. You just have to keep in mind your own needs. If you do need to take a break, that's great. I know there was times in my life early on that I might have felt strange about taking a break by myself, but it works. What works for you?
Yeah, I think we can very quickly fall into, in all aspects of life, this idea that, oh, we should do this, I should do
Yeah.
that, I need to do that. And then suddenly it's like, according to who?
Right,
Who
right,
makes up
right,
these
right.
rules? So you can make up your own rules, and that's perfectly fine.
So, how do you think your traits or our traits as introverts are an advantage? In the book you called it a zone of genius. What is your zone of genius? How do you find out what your zone of genius is?
Mm, great question. So I think you it's one of these things that evolves over time, that you suddenly get these little insights and clues as you go. Some people know that as zone of genius early on in life, but others, for me, it was always there. When I look back, I was always playing up to that, but I hadn't quite recognized it, and I wasn't using it to my advantage as much as I could have. But it was really on reflection, and I went out to my network and asked a handful of people I trusted, like, what is it that you've noticed I do well, maybe better than other people do, that perhaps I haven't noticed for myself? And I thought, because my background is in marketing and communication, and I was sure they were all going to come back with say, oh, communication, because that was my expertise. But it was really interesting that they all came back and said connection, that they've always been impressed with how I make connections between events, between people, between ideas, between various different things, and put those together in a new and different way that adds value and adds impact and changes the way that other people see things. I was like, that's fascinating. And then when I understood that and started to reflect on it, I was like, yeah, when I'm sitting with someone, I do it's almost, I had a friend who's a psychologist, and she was like, I get the impression that your mind's a little bit like that scene in Minority Report where they have all the images and they move things around and it's all very, very visual and comes together. And it's like, it's exactly like that. People tell me things and I can visually see them, and then they kind of move around until they make sense for me. And they have like there's some kind of framework or system that you think, oh, okay, well, it fits together this way, and then this, and then sharing that back to people, they're like, how did you get that from what I told you? What I told you was nothing like that. And I was like, well, that's the images that I see. So I think when they said that connection, it made the connection for me. And it's like, yeah, that's absolutely it. And looking back, even as a child, as helping see people really, and I think it's a lot to do with their value, because people, that's something that's really annoyed me is when people don't see just how valuable they are, just how unique and talented they are. And that's something that I've spotted with the things that they do, is spotting these the patterns between that is really embracing their value that they've missed and then feeding that back to them. And I remember doing that even as a young child. And one friend, I think we must have been about 7, and she'd made me, her dad was a silversmith, and she'd made me this beautiful silver bracelet as a thank you for helping her understand who she was, and that she could do something. And her dad was like, no, she was always felt really timid about this. You helped her believe in that, and thank you so much. And I was like, okay, thank you for this bracelet. So I think it's always been something that's been there. But often our zone of genius is hiding in plain sight. It feels so easy for us, we don't recognize it. So it's a great exercise to go out to just a handful of people, not too many people, but enough people that you'll see the patterns for yourself of where your real strengths lie. Yeah, it's a fun exercise to do.
Yeah, half the population are introverts, and so we don't all have the same gifts. It sounds like we're very similar. I've thought of that too, like, kind of like the 3D image, I can see all the pieces. I'm a very big picture person, but I see how all the pieces fall into place. So it sounds like we may be a little similar there where you can put together all the connections, but other people are going to have different strengths as introverts. And that's the important thing. And that's one way to find out is ask people. Sometimes it's reflecting ourselves, or, earlier we talked about taking like the Myers-Briggs. You said you were INFJ. I'm similar. I'm an INTJ. And the N stands for intuitive. And that's a gift where we know things, and it's not, sometimes it just comes to us. And sometimes people that are not intuitive don't understand where we get some of our information from, but it's definitely a gift. And like you said, sometimes we're so close to our own gifts that we don't see that they're gifts. We just think, well, everybody's like this, right? And it's not true. But at the same
Yeah.
time, everybody has gifts. And so, like you're saying, we can also help other people discover what their gifts are. And that's a lot of what this is about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when something comes to you so naturally and easily, we can discount it as like, well, well, everyone can do that. That's easy. We don't realize that actually, no, that's not the case.
Yeah. And the gift you described, not everybody has it, but you can definitely use it to help other people discover their own uniqueness and their own gifts that they're bringing to the world. Also on this show, we talk about myths of introversion. Is there a myth of introversion or two that you want to bust today?
Yeah, I think this myth, and I'm sure it's come up lots of times, so I won't go into that, the idea that introverts are shy. But the biggest one, when I first started writing my book and mapping it out, and it was always going to be a series of books, and it still will be when I actually get writing. But the first title that came to me was Introverts Can, because I've been told so many times introverts can't do public speaking, introverts can't sell, introverts can't lead, introverts can't do all of these things. And I think, well, that's just rubbish. Actually, to my mind, the way we approach a lot of these things, introverts are the best at public speaking, the best at networking, the best at sales. And I think that's the big myth, that introverts can't do certain things. And And often I think we're our own worst enemy in that way, thinking, oh, we feel a bit shy and nervous, therefore we can't network. But once we learn, as we talked about earlier, a few of the tools, a little bit of structure, a bit of preparation, we're amazing at these things. So yeah, that's the biggest myth, I think.
Yeah. And I say similar things. It's like introverts, you can say fill in the blank. They can't be good public speakers. They can't be good leaders. They can't. That's not true, just like you're saying. And I just say our approach is going to be different. We both love public speaking, but if we were to compare to how maybe an extroverted colleague prepared for a public speech, it would look very different. And often they don't have to prepare as much, and they might get up and give a great speech. Everybody loves them, and that's not going to work that way for me, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's so true. But there is no one approach that works for anyone in anything, introvert or extrovert. So it does take a bit of trial and error to find your own approach. And I think listening to shows like this, speaking to other people to see what other people do and sort of try that on for size and see what fits and think, okay, well, this bit feels really comfortable. That one, no, that's just not for me. And then bit by bit, piecing together your own strategies, I think, is really powerful. And it's kind of fun as well, particularly when you discover something that you think, oh, never thought of that, but it works brilliantly. It's it's a great moment.
Yeah, so let's bring that back to networking. What is a way that you approach networking that looks different from an extrovert?
I think perhaps the biggest realization was so where the lady that I followed, she connected people in a room, she was mixing people around, she was there and everywhere. And I was the opposite. I wasn't everywhere, but I would have one or two great conversations and really get to know somebody. And then, because she would connect people just like, oh, you two should meet. But I'd be like, well, you two should meet because you're looking for this and they're looking for that. And that's both what you have because I understood them. And that's why I got known for my network. It's not that I know everyone, although everyone always says, oh, you know everybody. It's just that they're like a friend was starting a new company and she goes, oh, I really need to find someone like this. It's like, oh, well, you need to speak to so-and-so. Like, you know everyone. I was like, I don't. I just know who the people are in my network on a deep enough level that I can connect them, make the right connections almost. So I think that's definitely something that we can do that's different. And when you have a conversation with someone and you're really listening and you're really invested in them and giving that time and attention, I think that's one of the biggest gifts we can give people because nobody gets time and attention anymore in our modern world. It's so fast. It's so like diluted that I think that's something that we can use, how we can use our gifts to make a real difference for other people and be known for the right reasons as well. So I think that's the thing that has helped me build my network, helped me build my brand and my reputation, is just having just building relationships one step at a time and then following up with people, but only those people that I want to. There's some people I meet when I'm networking and I get to know them and I really don't want to get them and know them anymore. They're just not someone that I feel that I connect with that has a place in my network. So I don't follow up with them. And I think that's key to guarding your energy as well, just picking and choosing, well, who am I really going to build a relationship with and just follow up with them just time to time. I saw this and thought of you, or, that conversation we were having. It's funny, I spoke to this person and they had very similar views. Like, can I introduce you? Or, just small things that you do with intention and thought and care. And that's what I've done that has built my network and, as I say, my reputation in that respect. But it was easy to do. It's very manageable as well.
You were also talking about your brand. How do you bring that into networking, building your personal brand?
So we all have a brand, whether we know it or not. The brand is your personal brand, certainly is how people think of you when you're not in the room. Like when they go home, when they reflect on the networking event, and how do they feel about you? What do they understand about your personality? How do they fit within your network? All of these things And like that's your brand. So being intentional about how you show up will help build the brand the way you want to. So it's worth thinking about, how do you want to be remembered? What do you want to be remembered for? What is helpful to be remembered for? And then being a little bit more intentional about, okay, well, how can I prepare beforehand to introduce myself, and what stories can I bring in, and what questions can I ask that highlight my brand? And then, it doesn't always go that way. You never quite know how a conversation is going to go, but having that preparedness and having that, like I said, those three questions or three words that remind me how I want to show up and how I want to be remembered, saying that to myself internally before I go into the conversation definitely impacts the way that I show up within that conversation as well. So I think it's not about being fake at all, but really, and you're talking on your recent episode about how we don't necessarily want to show up as our true selves, but it's like, well, how do we want to be remembered? What is it about ourselves that we can bring out to help other people, and how can we bring the best of ourselves, but in a kind of simple, prepared way that's going to have that lasting impact and for other people.
As an introvert, did you have to learn how to maintain conversations? Or
Yes.
okay, how'd you do that?
So I think that's the hardest part. And it was interesting. I think it might have been in Susan Cain's book Quiet that she's saying, introverts do small talk, but it's afterwards. We have the deep talk to get to know someone, and then we do the small talk to relax. It's not the other way around. But it's finding that balance as well. Because if you ask people deep questions too soon, then they do think it's weird often, unless you come across another introvert, and then it's happy days. But so it's managing that balance, and it was all just preparedness. So I like to introduce myself and always use a pattern of three. So I introduce three things about what I do, so the other person then can tell me, oh, well, tell me more about how you help people communicate their value through their sales. How does that work? And that's what they're interested in. So then I've got three things around the sales side of what the work I do, how I talk about that. And maybe it's a client story that I can bring in, or a funny anecdote or something around that. And then they can say, oh, well, this, and they will always respond to one thing in that conversation. And I've always kind of planned, okay, well, what's the next three things going down, almost like a flow chart, that could help me in this conversation. And then looking for some topical things that you can bring into the conversation. Just a couple of stories that stood out for you, and then some evergreen stories like the space pen I think you read in my book, that you can bring in anytime. There's these universal stories that are always, you can say quite in a short space of time. They're entertaining, they have a point to them, and sometimes a little bit of a twist, but you can prepare them in advance. And then he's like, oh, that reminds me of, the space pen. And then you just tell this little story, and then it just helps move things along a little bit. So being prepared, having all of these little stories in my back pocket, really helps to keep the conversation going. And I think networking and public speaking go really nicely together, because for public speaking, you have to prepare a talk. And within that talk, there's lots of stories and points. And then as I prepare more talks, I found that it was easier to network, because I was like, oh, I could just bring in this little thing, and I've prepared it nicely in a nice little structure. So I find that the two feed each other in a way.
Yeah, so just really keeping track of your stories and being able to tell them, whether it be in a public speech or in conversation. That's great.
Yeah, and you don't need hundreds of these stories. You just need like three examples of different types, that you can then bring in, and you'll build your bank of stories as you go as well. So, or you might
Yeah.
borrow one from someone else that you hear.
Yeah. And you brought up small talk, and as introverts, we do like the deeper conversations. And some people struggle with small talk, or they just don't like it. I've learned that it is a necessary thing. I've had the experience where I've I've had both experiences where I tried to go too deep too fast with somebody and it struck them as weird. I thought it was normal, but it struck them as strange. And I've also had conversations with introverts where we did just jump into the deep topics and it was just fine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's you learn through your mistakes, as we were saying previously. So but I think the big thing is what I used to do is if I got it wrong, I would replay that. I would get the train home after a networking event. It's like, oh, you were so stupid for saying that, and you this was awful, and they're gonna think this, really. And I don't do that. That's really
Yeah,
not the way to build up your networking confidence at all. But it's better to say when these things happen that, well, that was interesting. And I take the lesson and then leave the rest. Leave the guilt behind. It really doesn't help you at all. And then just take that lesson into the next interaction.
absolutely. So then what do you do? What's some of your strategies for follow-up after the event?
Yeah, I think, as I was saying earlier, it's just keeping it simple, keeping it personal. You can I'm not terribly organized, I have to say. I regularly start Trello boards to track people and then forget I've got a Trello board.
Mm,
But often something will stand out for me, like something, maybe it's a training I've created or a talk I've listened to or an article I've read, and I will think, oh, so and so would really like that, or it reminds me of this conversation, and then I'll share it with them. Or it's I'll suddenly think, oh, I'm going to this place, who do I know there and how can I connect with them, and just it's I'm not as planned as perhaps I maybe I shouldn't admit this as I could be.
I won't tell anybody.
But it is those personal moments, I think, and it's not trying too hard. it's it's not overworking it, but just simple, natural things that are relevant to the conversation or the person. And just sometimes it's even a year between follow-ups with people, and but even then it maintains that relationship, and they're like, oh, so nice to hear from you and whatever. Oh, I was actually, funny enough, I was thinking about you the other day, and and then it we have a little conversation and then it comes to a natural end, and that's that. But just thinking of these, keeping it in the back of your mind always, like, how could this be helping with my follow-up? How could this help people in my network? Who else would be interested in this? And doing these small things along the way.
Okay. So for you, it's really just a thoughtful approach. How can I help somebody else? What do I know about them? Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fits in with my personal brand, that I wanted to be known as someone who serves, who cares, who understands, who has the resources and the knowledge as well in certain respects. So it reinforces that brand as well.
Yeah. And so it's not all about, what you might gain, but you're really helping other people and making
Yeah.
those connections, which you have a gift for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think networking is 100% giving value first. It's serving other people, it's giving value. And then at some point in time, your network is better than Google. Because if you have a question and you Google it, you come up with all these ideas, but you don't know which is the best one for you, for your situation. You don't know what to do next. Go to your network and ask that question. And you think, oh, I think David would know about this. So, and then you're like, oh, I don't know, but so and so does. And then you'll find the real expert who can give you tailor-made advice. So it's great to have that resource, but to put the value in it first before you take anything away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes the value that you can give to people is asking for their expertise, that recognition. Oh, she's recognized that I'm an expert in this and this is my thing, is already value. So sometimes we're afraid to ask people for advice and help. But actually, if we turn it around and think, well, if people ask me, oh, you know all about this, can you answer this question? It does make you feel recognized and seen. So that can be valuable as well.
Yeah, very true. And then just the last thing on networking, what's your secrets for online networking?
Same thing. I think people think of online networking as different, but it's not. It's still about just making those initial the connections and start building a relationship from there. So many people that they're in a networking conversation and they'll just dump their LinkedIn link in the chat and expect, I don't know why they do that. What are you expecting us to do? Who are you? I
Yeah.
think that's just really rude. That's like being in a networking situation and just thrusting your business card at someone and walking away and not even saying hello first. So, being prepared, having your stories, this kind of thing, it's all the same online. So that's my biggest tip: is don't even think of it as different. It just and broadens out the opportunities, because now we can talk, which we couldn't do without this online world. We wouldn't have met. But so it does open up the sphere of possibilities, but you still want to build relationships. People are still people. You still want to be showing up the way that you want to be remembered, and all of these great things as well. So yeah, so that's my big tip with online. Don't think of it as any different.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's really good advice. And like you said, I mean, we're 9 hours apart, but we're able to have this great conversation and get to know each other. And it's amazing what we can do online.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've talked networking, especially as an introvert. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to?
I think we've covered so much, but I think it comes back to this idea of introverts can, and to look for ways to build your own self-belief, to be your own cheerleader, and to recognize your skills and talents and values. Because when we are living in what is perceived to be an extrovert's world, I mean, it isn't, because it's 50-50, as you say. And my world is business and entrepreneurship, and the majority of business owners are introverts, in fact. And so it really isn't an extrovert's world at all. But I think we have a responsibility to ourselves to recognize our gifts, embrace those and celebrate them, and build our own self-belief, and be our own cheerleaders along the way as well. And to remind ourselves that we may be introverted, but we absolutely can do anything we choose to.
Well said. Well said. So what's the latest thing that you're working on?
So a few things. This at the minute is all gone a bit crazy. That moment where you have nicely spread out projects and then they all
Yeah.
kind of things change and they all happen at once. So I'm working on a mindset success school with a group of mindset coaches who are mostly introverts, actually, funny enough. And so I'm really looking forward to getting that out there. That starts in November. It's a 12-month journey that we're going to take people on to really dive deep into their beliefs, their values, and how we bring those out through the way we conduct ourselves. So it's mainly for business owners, that one, because we look at marketing and sales and visibility and all these things that we need to embrace and do our own way, and that we may have these blocks around. So I'm really excited about getting that out there in November. Obviously working on my second book, which we working with my mindset team, we were encouraging each other the other day to overcome some procrastination. And so I was like, yeah, my book. And I actually collated what I had in talks that I'd produced and transcribed those and pulled it all together. And I've already got 75 pages. Obviously, it needs an edit. I was like, I'm halfway there. Brilliant. So those are my big new projects. But then, of course, continuing to serve my community of business owners and to continue supporting them through my coaching and my programs is an ongoing project that I love as well.
Yeah. And of course, where can people find out more about this work that you're doing?
So the easiest way is via my website. Basically, you can type Melitta Campbell into anything. That's Melitta with 2 T's, and you will find me. I remember being at a dinner party and I was umming and ahhing what to call my business. It's like, I'm struggling to find something unique. And then they said, how do I find you? Said, type Melitta Campbell into anything and you'll find me. I was like, oh. So I was like, I'll already go with the brand I already have that was gifted to me by my parents.
Yeah.
So you can find me by my website, and I'm very active on LinkedIn as well.
Okay. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. Melita, this has been a wonderful conversation. Such good information. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.